its intended or expected applications will be for really highly complex problems in specialized fields. In our language-based profession, unless you're, in a very, very technical area or you have specialized training, you're probably not going to be able to tell the difference at this point between O1 and GPT-4o. And in fact, you might even think it is inferior because it relies on system 2 slower thinking because it goes through every step in the reasoning process. So it takes longer for the outputs to be generated. And I found it not to be as eloquent as a Claude in terms of the way that it processes language.
I think you're referring to Dan Kahneman's book of Thinking Fast and Slow. That's sort of the ways our brains work in two different ways. We have this like immediate instinctual, what you do at a stop sign, your foot hits the brake, your brain knows to do that. It does it without thinking. And then you have this other part of your brain, this system 2 thinking that can slow down and solve a complicated math problem or maybe even a complicated calculus problem. Welcome to 2030 Vision, AI and the Future of Law, your go-to podcast focused on exploring the transformative impact of artificial intelligence on the legal industry. We're your hosts, Bridget McCormack and Jen Leonard, and together we'll navigate the rapidly evolving landscape of artificial intelligence, uncovering the opportunities, addressing the risks, and imagining the future.
In each episode, we bring you insightful discussions about cutting-edge technologies, the latest trends, actionable strategies, case studies, and novel insights that help your organization imagine its own future.
Whether you're a legal professional, a tech enthusiast, or simply curious about the future of law, this podcast is your gateway to understanding the profound changes AI will bring to the profession. Join us as we scale education and empower the legal community to thrive in an era of unprecedented innovation.
Welcome to 2030 Vision, AI and the Future of Law. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the newest episode of our podcast, 2030 Vision, AI and the Future of Law. I'm Jen Leonard, founder of Creative Lawyers, and thrilled, as always, to be joined by my wonderful co-host, Bridget McCormack, President and CEO of the American Arbitration Association. Hi, Bridget. How are you?
I am well. Good morning, Jen. Happy to be here. Excited to talk about strawberry today.
Same. And I love the fruit, and I'm very excited about the tech. And I'm excited that there's finally a generative AI model with a decent name that we could talk about in shorthand without being overly confusing. So we're going to talk today all about what strawberry is and why lawyers should care about it. As always, we will start with our Gen AI moments of the week or the past 2 weeks since we recorded. What is one thing that we've each done with generative AI that we found to be particularly noteworthy or magical? And then we will sift through a couple of definitions of terms that might be useful for people to understand as we grapple with the AI era. And then we'll dive into strawberry. So, Bridget, I'm going to toss it to you to hear about your Gen AI moment of the week.
Yeah, I am happy to talk later about my own attempts to get the most out of strawberry, which were not very magical, but I think that was a limitation on my part. But I presented last week to the Ohio Judiciary. They have their annual all judges meeting. And I was really doing a presentation about innovation and technology for courts. But the conversation veered quickly into generative AI, and there were so many questions that became really what the presentation was about. Was like generative AI only, which is fine by me. As you know, I love talking about it. And the audience was judges from every court. So there were trial court judges at the sort of district court level and circuit court level, and then appellate judges as well. And even I'm told the Chief Justice was in the room. I didn't actually meet her, but I'm told she was. And I would say that appellate judges were pretty skeptical that the technology could be useful to them and their clerks. Although I think Adam Unikowski's work that we've talked about before is pretty persuasive that it can be already useful to them and their clerks, as well as many other tools and ways in which it can be helpful, I think. But the trial judges were the ones that were had their hands up really quickly and basically wanted me right away to give them tools to help them with their very busy dockets full of litigants who appear without lawyers, and both on their end, on the court end, in better um, handling those busy long dockets, but more so for the litigants, that they clearly feel that they're just not able to give those litigants the kind of information and help that they might need to understand what's happening and navigate their busy courtroom. So, I mean, I will say that it was there were not very many judges in the room who were experimenting with the tech yet. But the interest level was so high from the trial judges in the courts where they have the busiest dockets, that it was quite notable, and makes me think we have to make sure that in this transition we don't lose sight of the fact that this technology can be a game changer for the courts that are delivering justice to the people who need it most in our communities. I think we can talk in some future episode about a project the AAA my team is working on with a court in Lancaster County, but on exactly that topic. But it really motivated me to make sure that every group I'm kind of involved with, the ABA Task Force and the National Center TR group, is thinking about really concrete ways to build tools that help trial judges in those courts. So, I mean, I left kind of encouraged and excited about how interested they were.
That is really exciting. Were you surprised at the difference between appellate court judges and trial court judges?
I was, because as the tools as we know them are so useful as for people whose currency is words, and appellate judges even more than trial judges, their currency is words. And so I guess I had the opposite expectation of what I saw. I sort of thought the appellate judges would be most excited, and the trial judges would think like, well, I don't write opinions. Do you know how many cases I'm processing every day? And I do, and they don't have time to write opinions. But it was really the opposite. So it was super interesting, I thought.
Yeah, I'm surprised too. I would think that the complexities of the different moving parts in a trial court, including all the evidence and the self represented litigants and the preservation of the record and all of those things that go into creating the puzzle of a trial, would be a little bit of a disincentive. But I guess the pressure and the excitement around trying to solve these problems that they've been seeing for so long must overcome those complexities.
I think that's right. And it's a reminder that, even though trial court judges oversee trials, there aren't, most cases don't go to trial, right? They're resolved in some other way. And many are resolved by people who don't have the help of lawyers. So I don't know, it'd be a fun space to keep an eye on, and maybe we can, talk about it a little more in a future episode.
Definitely.
How about you? Did you have a fun Gen AI moment this week?
So after yours, this is really like the sublime to the mundane. This was just one of those very like delightful little things that appeared in my Google Workspace that I wasn't expecting. And I don't even actually know whether it's generative AI or traditional AI, but I write a newsletter every month. And I like to pull different sources that I think are particularly interesting. And the way I've been doing it to date has been, copying and pasting the URL, and then, or I'm sorry, writing the language, then highlighting it and selecting the link, dropping the URL in. And it's like it takes a lot of time, a lot of manual time. And this month, when I went in to write it, I dropped a URL in, and then I highlighted the URL, and Google prompted me. I think it said like with Magic AI, and it said, would you like to replace this with the title of the article? And it already had the title ready to go. And it was just one of those like, yes, that is exactly what I want to do. And it sped up writing the newsletter probably by a good like 5 or 6 minutes, where I didn't have to do all of that manual work in the background. So I thought that was really cool. I think it's also sort of like what's going to happen, right? These things are going to be infused into the things that we do in a really user-centric way, where they're developing ways that they know that we're going to move and doing it for us.
Yeah, that's amazing. Honestly, I actually have to like reteach myself how to do that every single time I put a hyperlink in anything I'm writing. So that's incredible. I agree with you as well. I'm going to eventually get the new iPhone. And I'm excited for the ways in which it's just going to infuse it into our kind of day-to-day lives. And I do think that's how we get widespread adoption, is when it just inserts itself into your life and makes something easier. So that's very cool.
Yeah. And I say this to groups that we talk to a lot. It was just I think and hope that this era where we're trying to sort through all these different models and figure out their capabilities and all of those things will not last forever, where more and more is infused into what we do and there's a lot less friction on the front end. But that was just one of those early examples of that. And then the other cool thing that I saw, I did not experience, but I saw it on LinkedIn. The most prominent one I saw was Ethan Mollick's, but I've seen others. I know Josh Kubicki did a demo at the LVNX conference last week of a similar capability of Google's Notebook LM tool, which I understand to be a place where you can create repositories for your thoughts and for research and for things that you've written. And in Ethan's case, I think he actually uploaded his entire book and a few articles, and then the tech created a podcast with two people that sound sort of human, like you and me, talking back and forth about the book and some of the takeaways. And he said that it cited the book accurately. And I'm sure there are all sorts of applications for this, but it was both very cool and a little bit creepy how fast the tech is moving. So I would encourage people who are skeptical about it to take a look and maybe just Google, Notebook LM demos online and take a look at one. Have you seen this?
I have. I saw a number of examples of it last week, and I was walking into my office last week, and Jason Cabrera, who is now serving in our kind of AI enablement role at the AAA, was like excitedly telling me about it. And we put a lot of information and classes up online for people who are new to ADR processes, and he was like he was so excited about the ways in which we can put that content out in new forms just by loading it into this new tool. So I haven't tried it yet, but I will. I will soon. I'm excited about it.
Same. I haven't tried it either, but I'm planning to. And I think it runs on Gemini 1.5 technology by
Yeah.
Google. So that was very cool. Okay, so let's do a couple terms that we hear frequently in the Gen AI landscape. And this week we've picked two that I think become conflated frequently or are used interchangeably, and they're actually quite different. So the terms we picked this week are publicly available generative AI tools and open source generative AI tools. So do you want to start us off, Bridget, by explaining what publicly available Gen AI tools are?
Yeah, I will, and then I'll turn it over to you for open source. Publicly available tools, generative AI tools, are tools that are accessible to the general public, either through web interfaces or APIs, but without disclosing or showing the public the underlying model's architecture or the code that's been used to build it. And so these are the tools that you can use often for free, sometimes either for free or with a subscription, like ChatGPT or Google's Gemini or Claude, and they are offered by either in the free model, as we've talked about many times, or a subscription model. But they keep the source code and details to themselves; those are proprietary. And they have some or may have some usage restrictions for some of their advanced features. In addition to some of those, there are other generative AI public. I just did it. I just did exactly what we said. Other people did publicly available tools like Dali and Midjourney for image creation, and I know there are others as well for video and audio, but those are just some of the examples. And open source means something different. How is open source different from publicly available?
So open source is different from publicly available because the actual underlying code and the model architecture are shared outside of the company that created the underlying technology. The source code becomes freely available. You can view it. You can change it if you have those capabilities. I would have no idea how to do any of that. But if you're a developer, you can go in and take a look at the underlying code and make modifications and find new applications and then distribute what you've created with others. I understand, as I'm getting to understand the developer community better, that this is how models advance historically, is through open source opportunities where developers build on one another's work. It's very collaborative and community oriented. You can also run the code on your local infrastructure. So if you have that ability, you can, download it to your local device and play around with it and figure out new applications. We don't see, or I don't certainly, I think most people that we interact with outside of engineers and technologists don't use these versions of the models. We use the publicly available tools, but examples might be models from Hugging Face, which is a tech company, TensorFlow. And I know Meta, under Mark Zuckerberg's leadership, has sort of taken the approach of openly sourcing its code. And I think it stands alone as the major tech company doing that. I also understand there are controversies around creating open source code because of the power of the technology itself and the desire of those companies that are not openly sourcing their code to make sure that it's rolled out safely and responsibly and not placed in the hands of bad actors, which is a risk with open source coding. But it's also, I think, the way that tech communities generally develop software and new innovations in technology. So there's a little bit of friction around the conversations in Silicon Valley about whether we should be open sourcing Gen AI. Is that consistent with how you understand it?
It is, and I have a couple of times tried to dig into exactly what the arguments are on both sides of the open source debate, and it seems like there are some, sort of fundamental, foundational commitments at stake there, but there are also some commercial, competitive strands to that debate, and I haven't fully processed it all, but yeah, that's exactly how I understand the difference.
And there's a little bit of discussion, I think, in Genius Makers, which we used with our class as the sort of primer on generative AI history or AI history. And I know people like Jeff Hinton, who is the godfather of AI, but also deeply concerned about some of its ramifications. They have conversations in the book about whether open sourcing this code is a smart idea. But yeah, but also, they're all competing too. So there are other commercial reasons why they may not want to open source.
Absolutely.
So if you hear open source, it means something very different from publicly available models. But I think it's a confusing nomenclature, and understandably, people use them interchangeably. So with that, we're going to jump into our single topic of the day. And we don't usually do a single tech-oriented topic. We're trying really to think from a bird's eye view about how the tech impacts the profession. But we thought that there was an important development this week in the technology itself. So, Bridget, do you want to set us up for our strawberry topic?
Yeah. So OpenAI released a new model, which is actually confusingly called GPT o1, and or more commonly, and I prefer to call it Strawberry, which seems to be what they were calling it as they were developing it, and what was hinted at by OpenAI executives, including Sam Altman, over the last few months. And it's not just a new model the way each previous model has been released. It is a new model, but it's really different, which I understand is maybe why it's now called 01. But why don't you give us an overview of what O1 is and does, and maybe what's different about it?
Sure. I'll do my best to try to describe what's different about it. I will say, with respect to the name, my understanding is that it's called Strawberry because the first era of models, if you ask them how many R's are in the word strawberry, you would get an incorrect answer because there are very few places on the internet in the training data where explicitly the number of R's in strawberry is counted. Right. And so there's not an ability to sort of reason behind that. You're just getting the fill in the blank sort of architecture that we're familiar with the GPT models to date. And so Strawberry has become the nickname of this new version because the version itself is focused more on reasoning than simply sort of trying to fill in the blank of the next word based on the most likely token to follow. So that's sort of like the background. And then, as you said, oh one, do you think that these naming conventions do you think they're intentionally trying to mess with us at this point?
Yeah, I think they're toying with us. I think they're just trying to see if we'll keep going along. I really do.
Same, same. They obviously could market these better and label them in ways that we could understand them. But as you said, Bridget, O1 has become the name because it's a new class of models. So before we know, the GPTs to date have been trained on all of the information on the internet, lots and lots of books and writings, and they predict the next most likely token or word in a sequence. This, on the other hand, really digs into the reasoning process itself. And I know we're using reasoning and thinking and we're anthropomorphizing the tech, but I think that it's the only way to really describe it in a way that's understandable. So rather than just focusing on the output and guessing, it tries to supervise the process of reasoning out the answer to a question itself. And so to me, it's sort of the difference between grading a fourth grader's math homework and seeing if they got the right answer versus being able to look inside their brain and watch them every single step of the way as they're trying to figure out an equation and making adjustments at different points so that they can get to the right answer. So the difference here is really in scale and scope, and in comprehensiveness of what the technology is analyzing and how it's strengthening the reasoning process. And so its intended or expected applications will be for really highly complex problems in specialized fields. Right now, GPT-4o, which we've been using as the sort of most cutting edge frontier model from OpenAI, remains, to my mind, the easy solution for most of the tasks that we do in a word based world. But this technology is a game changer. It will advance and accelerate all of the tech that we've been following for a while. And so we thought it was important to really spend a little bit of time helping lawyers understand the distinction and what we think the long term applications and implications will be. How are you understanding it in a way that might be clearer than how I just described it?
No, actually, I think your analogy to grading the math homework versus seeing the steps the fourth grader is making to get to the answer is really kind of a great one. I have a couple others. Well, first of all, I should say it does count the R's in strawberry correctly, right? So it is doing, this model actually does do that correctly in a way that ChatGPT-4 or GPT-4 does not. So it clearly does do something different. I'm cheating now and stealing from Kevin Roos and Casey Newton on the Hard Fork podcast, but they put it in a way that helped me understand why it was different and important. And I'm going to try and explain how they put it, or at least I'm going to explain it in the way that it made sense to me, which is the previous models have all been trained on the amount of data, and their abilities depended on how much data they were trained on. And the general rule of scaling was the more data they were trained on, the more data that they learned, the better they were at producing outputs. And so that's why GPT-4 is better than ChatGPT. Each model is trained on more data, and it performs better. But this new model, O1 or Strawberry, is trained not on more data, but rather on the ability to, like we've been saying, reason, to sort of think through a question or a problem step by step, both kind of forwards and backwards, and to take its time in thinking through those steps, and even to show its work. If you've used it, it doesn't show every single step, but it shows kind of how it's thinking through the answer it's about to give you. And what's important about that, or what's significant about that, is it's an entirely new way to scale these models. So, which is not to say that the first scaling methodology is done. There is always more data to train on, and I don't know if we've talked here about synthetic data, but We can talk about that eventually, but there's always more and more data that the models can train on and scale for that reason. But now they can also scale in this other way, by being better and better trained at reasoning and carefully thinking through a problem. And it just is an entirely new way to grow and scale the models, and it that that helps me understand how significant it is. Which isn't to say that I have had a lot of physics or advanced math needs for Strawberry yet, but I am pretty taken aback by what it's going to mean. I think, for how quickly these models are going to, impact so many important fields. I think you've probably followed the places where people are already seeing a difference, and I don't think lawyers are probably yet the folks who are getting the most out of Strawberry. But what's your sense of where this particular model will have or is already having an impact and is likely to have the biggest impact?
Well, as you noted, Bridget, right now on the benchmarking tests, the model is performing at just much more impressive levels than the GPT classes so far on mathematics and science. Just a couple of data points in a qualifying exam for the International Mathematics Olympiad. The new version, the O1 Strawberry, scored an 83% on the test compared to what GPT-4o did at 13%. So enormous jumps. And it sort of reminds me of when we went from GPT 3.5 to GPT 4o and we saw the jumps in the LSAT scores and the UBE bar exam. They were just exponentially better. Similarly, in coding proficiency, O1 reached the 89th percentile in Code Forces competitions. And in scientific reasoning, the next update of O1 is reported to perform similarly to PhD students on challenging benchmark tasks in physics, chemistry, and biology. And I've just heard lots of examples. I think one might be from the Hard Fork podcast of PhDs who have said that it took them a few years to figure out problems that it takes GPT or O1, maybe an hour to figure out. So the compression of time within which they're able to reason through these mathematics and scientific processes, it really is mind blowing. And like you said, in our language-based profession, unless you're, in a very, very technical area or you have specialized training, you're probably not going to be able to tell the difference at this point between O1 and GPT-4o. And in fact, you might even think it is inferior because it relies on system 2 slower thinking because it goes through every step in the reasoning process. So it takes longer for the outputs to be generated. And I found it not to be as eloquent as a Claude in terms of the way that it processes language. But it will be here in our language-based profession soon. And so we can talk a little bit about that. But I'd love to, focus on this back and forth process of not just moving in one direction, but being iterative and going back and changing parts of the reasoning process. And again, we follow our favorite Ethan Mollick, who wrote a great Substack piece and gave a good example that helps contextualize it, I think. I think you also followed his example, Bridget. Would you be willing to share his example?
Yeah. Yeah, I thought Ethan's example was also a great. He as always, he was able to translate for lay people like me why this is a significant step in these models. He had it work on a crossword puzzle, and it was a pretty hard crossword puzzle. I mean, I'm not I'm not a crossword puzzle aficionado. So maybe it wouldn't be as hard for those of you who are, but for me, just looking at it, it was a pretty hard crossword puzzle. And the previous models would often guess the first clue. And if it wasn't right, of course, it then couldn't complete the puzzle because there was no way to do it. But Strawberry or O1 was able to think out loud about what the potential answers to the first clue were, and then go to the next clue to see if each of the potential guesses for the first clue would work with the potential guesses for the second clue, and then go back to the first clue to figure out the right one. And obviously, that's what our brains have to do to solve an actual crossword puzzle. And that's why most people do them in pencil, I believe, because you can keep, trying this, that, and the other thing. And Owen doesn't have to use a pencil, but it does. It's doing the same kind of process. You actually used the term, Jen, a minute ago, system two thinking. And I think you're referring to Dan Kahneman's book of Thinking Fast and Slow. That's sort of the ways our brains work in two different ways. We have this like immediate instinctual, what you do at a stop sign. Your foot hits the brake. Your brain knows to do that. It does it without thinking. And then you have this other part of your brain, this like system two thinking, that can slow down and solve a complicated math problem, or maybe even a complicated calculus problem, or an advanced or applied math problem. And that's another way that I've been thinking about it. It's like Dan Kahneman, slow thinking by the model. And again, sorry for talking about the models like they're humans, but that is the weirdest thing about them. And that to me is how Ethan's example helped me understand the new capabilities. Do you think I got it about right? Or is there more that you would add to that?
No, totally. And it's the reason why the outputs are slower, right? Is because it is deploying system two thinking, like you said. And I think the idea long term is to be able to blend different models where we wouldn't necessarily be blending them, but the companies would be, so that we have really quick system one answers for things that are not that complicated, like an internet search, for example. And then we're able to give the AI more time to think through the system two type problems that are really thorny.
I was trying to figure out complicated enough questions to give it so that I could see its new capabilities, but it turns out I'm just not smart enough to actually give it hard enough questions, because it kept answering me so quickly that I was like, oh, I can't stump it. But I will tell you, we have an engineer at the AAA who's been building with these generative AI tools, and he showed up the Monday after it was first released, so excited about everything it was already able to help him do quickly. So obviously, we're going to see some tremendous impacts. I'm not sure we're going to see them for lawyers this week. But why do you think lawyers should care about this new model?
I think lawyers should care, probably because we're not going to see it in legal this week. And so I think lawyers are still trying to get their arms around the first class of GPT models. And there's a lot of skepticism. I think the skepticism is waning a little bit, but there's still, the tendency, and lawyers are great critical thinkers. It's a great skill set that we bring to it, but the tendency to focus on current limitations of the models, or to chalk it up to just guessing, a fill in the blank, versus really being able to process information in a more human-like way. And I think that more lawyers should be aware that this technology is now available and has profound impacts already in science and math. And that the rumor is that OpenAI will be releasing its next language model, which I think is codenamed Orion. And that language model will be built on Strawberry-like technology. And so I think the implications for legal are enormous. I can't even actually wrap my own head around what it might look like once Strawberry's applied to language more intensely. But I think that lawyers should really be aware that while we're pointing out the limitations in the generative AI applications we've seen to date, the world has already changed around us. We just haven't felt it yet. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I do think there are some lawyers for whom it will have an impact sooner rather than later. I think in-house teams who, work closely with their business side partners or business side clients probably are going to have to roll up their sleeves and experiment with it, sooner rather than later. They're not going to wait for Orion, wait for it to be put into language to the language models they're comfortable using. And I think legal ops professionals probably are going to have use cases for it pretty quickly. So I do think any law firm, any in-house team, any legal organization that is already focused on thinking through the ways in which this technology is going to change what it does and how it does it, should have a couple of lead people on their teams who are experimenting with it and figuring out the ways in which it might make a difference for their ops and for their clients. Just like we've said with every other model, the best way to figure out how it's going to make a difference for you and your practice is to start using it. And Ethan Malik would say you can't just use it for 15 minutes. You have to use it for at least 10 hours to figure out how it's going to impact what you do. Do you have other thoughts or advice for lawyers thinking about this new model at this point?
I think you're exactly right, and I'm going to go all the way back to your conversation about the Ohio judiciary and the difference between appellate and trial courts. I think we've talked about this before, but I think that you're exactly right that corporate law departments will feel this a little bit more quickly than law firms will because they'll be influenced by the organizations that they're supporting. And law firms, again, are one step removed from that. So I think you're exactly right that law firms should be thinking about this actively because their clients will be thinking about it sooner than they will. So getting their arms around it will be useful, or at least just understanding that it's out there. I think in terms of what lawyers should be doing, I'd love your thoughts on this, Bridget. My thoughts are right now that most lawyers probably shouldn't be doing much of anything with it, but being aware that it exists and again, sort of moving forward and thinking through your strategy rather than looking at the current limitations of the models and pointing out the deficiencies. But what do you think lawyers should be doing right now around Strawberry?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think thinking about the ways in which when this particular type of training is meshed with the models that lawyers are already getting a lot of use out of is worth spending some time on right away. And like I said, there are some people on your team that have a little more technical expertise or background, right? We know a lot of those folks who go to law school after they decided against their, chemistry PhD. I had a number of them at Michigan. They were amazing. I would, pull those folks in who might not have been as impressed with these models so far, and get them excited about helping you think about what might work. Our daughter's doing her PhD in econ, and econ is, basically math nowadays. And it's, and her boyfriend is doing his PhD in math, and they've been like basically unimpressed with generative AI. The last year and a half, they were always like, yeah, we keep trying it, but it doesn't really help us very much. And that's because the work they do is so complicated and technical, and that I don't think that the models that I've been, blown away by can help them much. And this, I think, is going to be the game changer, right? This is going to be where their fields are going to be able to make incredible advances pretty quickly. I think the Hartford guys said, I forget who it was that they've interviewed repeatedly about each of the models. I don't know, I think he's an AI professor, and he said that the GPT-4 was basically kind of a crappy grad student. I don't think they said crappy. I think I just said crappy, but kind of a crappy grad student. And this model is already a mediocre grad student, and it's the first one. So I think his response was like, imagine the next version, right? So I don't know. My brain, like yours, I don't think can fully comprehend what it's going to mean. But it's clearly significant, and significant change in every industry impacts lawyers who are, the folks who try and help those industries through those changes.
Well, we hope you have enjoyed indulging us in doing a little bit of a deep dive on a new iteration of the technology. I'm really, really curious to see in all professions, like you said, Bridget, just the ability to solve problems, the ability to develop cures for diseases, to develop breakthrough technologies to fight climate change. I mean, I've been really excited to see some of the scientific and mathematical applications that I don't understand. It has succeeded in making me feel much dumber than I usually feel, which is probably a good thing, but by testing it out and having nothing to give it. But the knowledge that people who are smarter than I am, like your daughter and her boyfriend and others in the scientific community, are already seeing promise is very, very cool and a little bit unsettling as well.
Yep, agree. I think more cool than unsettling, but yes, I agree with both.
Well, I think we can leave it there for now until our next episode, and certainly when Orion comes out, we'll have a lot to talk about Strawberry's application in language and in law. Until then, we will continue to explore all of the evolving technology, the business models, the educational system that we hope will improve in the years ahead because of generative AI in our profession. So I want to thank you, as always, Bridget, for educating us about this new tech. And we'll look forward to seeing you on the next episode of 2030 Vision, AI and the Future of Law. Take care, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to 2030 Vision, AI and the Future of Law. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our podcast and leave a review. Stay informed and inspired as we continue to explore the AI-driven future of the legal profession. We'll see you next time.